Anytime you are going to be implementing the Azure Firewall in your environment, the first thing I always recommend you do is check out their documentation. This article right here can be found very easily just by going and doing a Google search on what is the Azure Firewall. Okay, so if you go there, you search that, skip all the ads, of course. Microsoft has this article right here, what is the Azure Firewall. And the reason I recommend that is because they're always adding new features. It's never ending. It seems like they're doing it about every week, and they're adding new offers. That right now there's 3 SKUs being offered here: stock keeping units, standard, premium, and basic. And you can see those here. With standard, as you can see, it provides a layer 3 through layer 7 firewall for you, which of course that's the network layer all the way to the application layer if you understand the OSI model. All right, it supports threat intelligence for alerting and denying based on any type of malicious traffic or malicious IP addresses and all that. Now they've also got a premium offering, and it ups this to providing what's called intrusion detection and prevention services. So if you're familiar with what's called an IDS or an IPS, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention system, this is going to add that. It's going to add a signature-based analysis. And so you got 58,000 signatures and 50 categories of different threats. They're going to add, they tell you that the exploit categories are included as well. Malware, phishing, coin mining, Trojan attacks, all of that gets added. And then finally, they've also got Azure Firewall Basic. And Azure Firewall Basic is mostly geared towards a smaller environment that's connecting with an on-premise environment or to a file-based services using SMB, server message block, which is, again, if you're just transmitting files back and forth and you're mainly just doing file services, that's what the basic is going to be good for. All right. Okay, so that's my first recommendation. All right, so the next thing would be I am ready to maybe start adding a firewall. And the first thing you need to understand about adding a firewall is that you have to have a firewall subnet created where it's going to be. So if you're doing like a hub and spoke, you would go into like the hub subnet, the hub VNet, and create a subnet for your firewall. So let's pop over into portal.azure.com. So we'll go there, portal.azure.com. We're going to go to our resource group. Resource groups here, and I have a resource group called VNet Demo RG. I'll go in there, and I have my VNet 1, which is my hub VNet. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click to create, and I'm just going to search for the word firewall, and just going to hit enter. And this is the one I want. Be careful because there's a lot of different firewall options. The one that we're talking about right now is just the standard Azure Firewall. That's this right here. So we're going to click to create, click firewall, and I just want to real quick, I want to show you what I'm talking about with the subnet. If I scroll down, you're going to notice that it needs a subnet called Azure Firewall Subnet. Okay, that is a requirement for this to work. So let's go back over here. We're going to go on to VNet 1. All right. And we're going to go to subnets, and we're going to create a subnet called Azure Firewall Subnet. Okay, and that Azure Firewall Subnet, I'm going to make the firewall subnet like 10.1.10. All right, 10.1.10.0/24. That's going to be my firewall subnet. All right, and yeah, we'll click save. All right, it's now in the process of creating that subnet. So now we're ready. We'll go back over to our resource group into our VNet Demo RG. Now we're ready to create the firewall. So we can click create, search firewall, hit enter. There it is. Click create, and we're now on the creation screen of the firewall. All right, I'm going to go here and give it a name. I'm just going to call it My Firewall Demo. And I'm going to select East US, and then it asks if I want availability zone. Don't want an availability zone right now. And then this is where I would choose basic, standard, premium. All right, I'm going to go with standard. And then it says firewall management. It says use firewall policy to manage this firewall. And then there's also classic. So there used to be just a set group of straight rules you could configure for the firewall. And then what they started doing is they started allowing us to create these things called firewall policies, which can be groups of rules instead of just one massive group of rules. We can have different groups, and that's what our firewall policy is all about. And so this is the newer way to do it, and this is the way I would, of course, recommend that you would remember for this firewall policy. And then, of course, I don't have a firewall policy that I've created. I have a couple of default ones here, standard policy, basic policies, but I can also click to add a new one. I'm going to call it my firewall policy demo, and I'm going to go with East US, standard, click OK. All right, this is going to be a fresh new set of policies that I can configure whenever I'm ready. All right, and then I got to, if I'm creating a virtual network, if I'm using an existing one, I'm going to use an existing one. It's going to be VNet 1. All right. And then right there, it's asking the public address I want to use. So if I want to associate a public address, obviously, with this, I'm going to say firewall pip for public IP address. That's going to associate a public IP address with the firewall now. All right. And then they ask about doing forced tunneling. It says enable forced tunneling to create an additional subnet for the firewall management traffic. This subnet will be direct traffic to the internet. So if you basically wanted to do a forced tunnel, this you can. In fact, you can also look right here. It talks about learn more, and they talk a little bit more about this idea of a forced tunnel. If you're familiar with what's known as automatic versus static NAT and all of that, that's along the lines of what this forced tunnel is going to do for us. All right, it's going to allow us to direct traffic in a network address translation based environment. That's not really what I want to look at right now, so I'm just going to keep that disabled. All right, and then from there I'm going to click review and create, make sure the validation passes, and then I'm going to click to create. All right, at that point I'm going to pause this recording and let this finish creating. All right, so now that that's done, I'm just going to go to the menu button. We'll go to resource groups. We'll click on our VNet demo RG here, and you can see the my firewall demo listed right here. If we click on that, this is the actual firewall resource. All right, and we can look at our firewall policy, which of course would contain our firewall rules, right? We click on that, the my firewall policy demo. This brings up the different policies and collection rules and all that. So Microsoft has a very good document that kind of outlines what this is all about. I want to show that to you right now. You can search for this. If you were to go to Google or Bing, you could search Azure Firewall Policy rule sets, and you'll find this. And I like this because they give you this little visual here that kind of outlines what this is all about. So you have the firewall policy itself, which is the resource we created. Okay. Then you have the rule collection groups. Of course, a rule collection group, as you can probably imagine, is just a group of rule collections. Okay. And so you can see this rule collection group has no rule collections. This one has 2 sets. This one has 2 sets. This one doesn't have any rules, though, so there's nothing really going on here. There's nothing really going on here. But down here, they've got multiple rules that will go along with that. All right. Now, here's the other thing. This is sort of key here, is when it comes to these rule collection groups, all right, they tell you that there are 3 default rule collection groups, and their priority values are listed here. You got what's called the default DNAT, which is destination NAT, destination network address translation, it has a priority of 100. You have the default network rule collection group, has a priority of 200. And then you've got the default application rule collection group, which has a priority of 300. Okay? All right. Now, what's very important here, the thing I really, really want you to remember here, is it says even though you can't delete the default rule collection groups nor modify their priority values, so you cannot modify those priority values, they do tell you, though, you can manipulate the processing order in a different way. If you need to define a priority order, there's a different than the default, you can just create your own custom collection groups. So if you can't mess with these, but you can create your own, and you can mess with those. And that's ultimately what they're telling you can do here. So that's the idea of a collection group. Okay, that's this level here. All right. If we look at the actual rule collections themselves, you have rule collections. All right, and they have to belong to a group, and there's three kinds of these rule collections. Again, the destination NAT, the network, and the application, right? And so the idea there is that you can define some kind of an action for these, either an allow action or deny action, and you can adjust the priority level if, of course, you've created your own custom ones, all right, at that level. So what do the actual rules have to do with? Because that's the confusing part here. A lot of people are like, okay, well, I understand the collections, right? So you got collections of more than one rule, but the rules are the tricky part, right? What is the rules? Well, the first thing you have to understand about rules is there's inbound and outbound, right? And inbound means exactly what you probably think it means. It means traffic trying to flow in, right, into the firewall. And then an outbound rule would be traffic trying to flow out, trying to leave the firewall, okay? So the idea is inbound, they tell you traffic sourced from the internet. Outbound, traffic sourced from a private IP address within Azure. That's the way to look at it, okay? So then you have DNAT, the actual rule type. DNAT, this is allowing inbound and outbound traffic through the public IP address. And so what you're going to use DNAT for is when you want a public IP address to be translated to a private IP address. So if traffic is flowing into the internet, maybe it's coming in through the public IP, and you want it to be translated to maybe a web server. So maybe I've got www.examlabpractice.com that's mapping to a web server, a virtual web server on the inside. That's what I'm going to use a DNAT rule to allow. Okay. The next is a network rule. And that's just a standard layer 3 rule. This is pretty much exactly like working with an NSG, a network security group. All right, you're going to be basing it on a source and destination IP, a port number, a protocol, all of that stuff. So it's just your standard run-of-the-mill IP filtering based rule, just like a network security group does. And then finally, you got an application rule. That's where you get into layer 7. And this is where you can filter based on a fully qualified domain name, URL, then the HTTP, HTTPS based protocol. So you can decide to allow something based on the URL or domain name that someone has typed. All right. So again, that's how these different rules are going to operate. The firewall policy, the overall policy contains rule collection groups. Below those, you have rule collections, which is really just multiple rules, and then, of course, the individual rules that are going to be applied. All right, that is the idea of the policies that you're seeing here, the idea of your actual policy and what the rule collections are going to do. Okay, so looking over here on the left under settings, you'll see the parent policy, rule collection. You see all these different blades. The parent policy is a feature in which if you had multiple Azure firewalls, you can have a parent policy to your Azure firewalls. And so that way you're not having to reinvent the wheel. If you wanted to tie a single policy to multiple firewalls, you could. But below that, we have our different rule collections, and then here are the 3 different types of rules. So if we want to create a rule collection, we'll go here and we'll click to create a rule collection. All right, I'm just going to call this firewall rule collection demo. Okay, specify the rule collection type, whether it's going to be network, application, or DNAT. Okay, so I'll do network, and then I can set a priority to it. It says set a priority between 100 and 65,000. So I'm just going to say 100. And then rule collection action. Am I allowing stuff or am I going to deny stuff? All right. Of course, I am going to allow stuff. And what do you want to give the rule collection? What do you want which rule collection group you want to tie this to? Remember, there's 3 of those, 3 rule collection groups. Of course, this is a network rule, so we're going to tie it to the network rule collection group. And then if I want to go ahead and specify a network rule to go with this, I can, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to click add, and it's going to create this rule collection group. Now, it will take a couple of minutes to do this, so I will pause the recording while that's happening. Okay, so now that that's done, you can see that's created here, and I'm ready to start creating some rules. So I come over here to the network rules. All right, I can click to add a rule, and it says, all right, rule collection group. Here's the rule collection group I'm selecting. All right, there's the rule collection. Give it a name. Okay, maybe I'm going to allow, maybe I've got a virtual machine and I'm going to allow traffic to flow to that virtual machine. All right, from anywhere on my VNets. All right, so we'll say web server VM. All right, this is our IP address source, or I could have a group of IPs that you'd have to create, but I want to do an IP source. Okay, so source IP, I'm going to say star. That means anywhere. This could be, traffic could be flowing from anywhere. And the destination IP would be whatever that web server's address is. We'll say the web server's address is 10.2.1.20. Okay, that is the IP address of my web server on my network right now. Okay, then the protocol, TCP, and then I will do port 443 because it is using, HTTPS. So we'll click save, and we've now gone through and created this rule for that web server. Okay, now it does take a few seconds or so before that rule will get created, but there is the rule right there. All right, so if I wanted to create a DNAT rule, I could do that. Come over here and add a rule. Notice it says I don't have a rule collection for that, so I could say let's add a rule collection for DNAT rule. We'll say DNAT collection. DNAT, this is the type, right? It's going to use the default destination NAT. We're going to click add. Oh, got to assign the value. Whoops. So we'll say the value will be 103 or 102, and we'll go with the DNAT collection group, and we'll click add. Okay, we'll give that just a moment to create. Okay, once that's done, I can go here to add rule. We'll select our group here, the collection group, and that's going to be the DNAT one, and we'll go with DNAT collection. We'll give it a name. So we're going to say translate to web server. Okay, capitalize that just for fun. Translate to web server. Okay, the IP address and then source. So I'm just going to say, hey, it doesn't matter. You're coming in from the internet, and maybe this is for a public web server, that internal web server that we have. We are making that public, but traffic will have to pass through the firewall coming in from the internet. Okay, the destination address, this is going to be the public address of our firewall. Now, if you don't know that, you can find that out pretty easily. Okay, all you got to do, let's go back over here. We'll go to the menu button. We'll go to resource groups. We'll go to our VNet demo, and we'll look at our public IP address that's associated with our firewall. So if we go here to our firewall, okay, we'll go to public IP. There's the address right there. That's the public address that is currently available for my firewall. So I'm going to copy that. All right, and then we'll just paste that in. So this is the address somebody would be going to from the internet. Doesn't matter where they're coming from. This is where they're going to from the internet. And then what we're going to do, this is TCP, we're going to map that. We'll say port 443, but we're going to map that to, we could do a DNS name if we wanted. We're going to map that based on that address, that public address. And we'll keep the translated port at 443. We'll click save. And we've now created our DNet rule. Of course, it does take a moment to create. Now, if I wanted to create an application rule, it's pretty much the same process. Go over here to application rules. I'd go for a rule collection here. App rule collection. Okay, it's an application. Set the priority. Okay. We'll say 105. And then allow. Specify it's going to be app rule. We click add and give that just a moment to create. Now that that's done, I'm going to go up here to add rule, specify that I'm doing a default application rule collection group. The collection I created is app rule collection. Okay, maybe this is for my web server URL, and I might say, well, this is the exam lab practice web server. Okay, and then the IP address maybe we'll say is just star, so it doesn't matter what IP address is coming in. And then destination FQDN, I could say examlabpractice.com. They have this TLS inspection. If you're doing premium, it adds an additional layer of security. And then we'll be allowing these protocols here. We'll say HTTPS://443, and then we'll click save. And we've now created this application rule that basically says, hey, any time examlabpractice.com is the URL that somebody's trying to get to, I'm going to be allowing that in. Okay, that's the idea there. Of course, you know, the other side of this is I would need to make sure that I went through the process of setting up what are called DNS zones and all that, which I'm not getting into in this video, but that is the side of that I would need to configure in order to allow that URL if anybody's typing a domain name to get into it. So hopefully that now gives you a good understanding of just setting up the firewall and the different rules that are going to be associated with the Azure Firewall. Hey, this is John Christopher. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want you to know that I'm trying really hard to grow this channel, so I hope you'll give me a like and a subscribe. Also, if you'll check the description in this video, I've got a link for you that can show you how you can get access to all my different courses. I have lots of different Microsoft certification courses that'll help you pass your exam. All right, thanks a lot for watching the video, and I hope to see you again.